Claim 3 of fundamental claims Karaites have against the oral law. The words of the Mishnah and the Talmud are clearly the words of men living in the 2nd and 5th centuries of the Common Era, and are absent of the familiar biblical phrases, "and the Lord spoke unto Moses, saying," or "and thus says the Lord," as we find throughout the Bible. This argument would only be a challenge if the Mishnah and the Talmud claimed themselves to be prophetic texts, but they don't. Why don't Karaites have a problem accepting the book of Psalms, the book of Proverbs, and a number of other biblical books which do not contain the words, "Thus says the Lord," or "and the Lord spoke to Moses"? But then they suddenly have this problem with accepting the Talmudic texts. And who decided that these books would have been included in the biblical texts anyway? The Mishnah and the Talmud claim to contain the legal rulings of the ancient Mosaic Court. The Tanakh, the Old Testament, consistently refers to these legislators and the divinely appointed authority given to them. Examples will be given later, either in this clip or another clip. The Tanakh does not only teach that prophets would be ordained by the Creator of the universe, it also teaches that the positions of a king, of legislators, and of officers who enforce that legislation are also divinely appointed in the law of Moses. The Mishnah was simply the first code authorized by the Mosaic Court, which was intended only to serve as a guide for public teaching of the oral instruction. The Mishnah was intentionally very abbreviated, since the Mosaic Court was still functioning at the time of the Mishnah's composition, and the members of the court had not yet begun to feel an immediate threat of being overthrown by an invading occupied force. The Mishnah was not intended to be an exhaustive codification of all the oral instruction, neither of the oral instruction from Mount Sinai, nor of oral rabbinic instruction, divrei sofrim, from the Mosaic Court. The fourth claim. The rabbis claim that the oral law is the official interpretation of the Torah given on Mount Sinai. Yet, if one actually looks at the Mishnah and Talmud, they are full of the opinions of rabbis who disagree with each other on almost every issue. The rabbis claim that whenever there are such disagreements, both opinions are the words of the living God. Karaites maintain that it is unreasonable to believe that God would contradict himself. In reply to this, there is more than one type of oral law. Relatively few of the laws discussed in the Talmudic texts are considered by the Talmud to be oral instruction from Mount Sinai. The majority of argumentation contained in the Talmudic texts is over what the proper rabbinic law should be. Rabbinic law refers to the adjudication which written Torah commands the Mosaic Court to practice, so as to instruct the people regarding how to correctly implement the 613 commandments of the written Torah, and to give a final verdict on matters of dispute and disagreement among the population. See Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 8 through 10, 2 Chronicles chapter 19. The written Torah gives recognition to the type of disagreements which appear in the Talmudic literature. Examples will be given later. Sometimes the argumentation is over a biblical indication of a law, but not over the law itself. The variety of opinions among Karaites prove the practical necessity of this type of a Judaic judicial system. The Almighty already touched on the issue long before Karaites lost knowledge of the solution. The variation of practice among Orthodox Jews in modern times is also due to new situations that were not discussed in Talmudic literature, and which have arisen since the disbandment of the Mosaic Court as a result of Roman occupation roughly 1,700 years ago. The Almighty has already promised by the hand of Isaiah the prophet that our judges will be restored as of days of old, in Isaiah chapter 1, verse 26. As for the saying, both opinions are the words of the living God, Elu Elu, divrei Elohim hayim, this phrase is not only misunderstood by Karaites, but also misunderstood by a large number of Orthodox Jews. This phrase is only to be understood in the context of theoretical application of the principles of biblical interpretation, and only when these principles are properly applied. The phrase only means that when more than one legal understanding could be concluded by means of the authoritative interpretive principles, then both legal understandings are theoretically valid, so long as they don't contradict already existing rulings of the Mosaic Court. But only the legal understanding which the majority of the judges of the Mosaic Court agree upon become the binding and authoritative legal understanding. Karaite corrected that the Almighty does not contradict himself, but sometimes human understanding contradicts the correct understanding. May the Almighty open our eyes to the wonders of His Torah. Shalom.